Hello, everybody.
Hello. Nice guy.
This feels like rep class all of a sudden. I have to admit, I'm a little bit feeling underprepared with this presentation, not because I haven't worked on it a lot, but because what I'm finding is that the more you dive into a study of intonation, essentially what you're looking at is, there's no exaggeration to say that you're really getting into a study of the nature of the universe, and the nature of human interaction with the universe, and the nature of human communication with each other. That's the history of intonation. I've finally had to kind of begrudgingly admit to myself that we're probably not going to cover all that in 50 minutes. So this is, essentially I've been working for years about kind of establishing a way of using drums and a way of using notation that are more descriptive of the way intonation actually works, because we don't have anything like that that works for performers. Theorists, mathematicians, physicists, a little side branch of composers called just intonation composers, they have very, very specific and descriptive language and terminology and notation to talk about intonation. But performers, the people who actually use intonation in what we do, we have only the most kind of rudimentary understanding of what intonation is, how it works. Frankly, the terminology is misused like most of the time. So I'm going to kind of blow through a whole bunch of stuff. If anything isn't making sense, don't worry. My point is to get to, by about 11:30, I hope to arrive at where I'll be talking about what's in those sheets I passed out, which is basically what you can do with this when you go home and practice. I'm just going to kind of blow through a whole bunch of stuff. If it's not making sense, don't worry. At 11:30, just check back in, and we'll get to what you can do with it. This is all hastily thrown together. This is basically what I'm talking about. You can't really get into a study of intonation without getting into physics, without getting into all kinds of things. The basic problem that we all deal with is that intonation is weird, right? Like, there are all kinds of kind of confusing and misleading and misunderstood things about intonation. There is no terminology to talk about intonation, and the typical methods we use for practicing intonation when we're alone. The trouble is they don't really yield empirical results. It's enormously subjective and enormously subjective to what I call conditioned intonation. The reason for it, I'll try to flesh out some of this, but the reason for that is the presumption of, I know it's hard to read, I'll just read it out loud, I know it's small. The presumption that 12-tone equal temperament, in other words, the notes on the piano, the presumption that and harmonic equivalency and the circle of fifths, etc., the presumption that is in tune, that is the kind of standard model of the way sound works and the way notes work, that's the reason that there's so much confusion about intonation, and the reason that there's, frankly, so much questionable intonation, and particularly in low instruments. And I don't mean because low instruments are hard to play or because low instrument players aren't as good. I mean because it's actually more important to lower the instrument. The solution that I've come up with after years of observation and study and reading and research and practicing and trying and talking to people and trying everything out there, what I've arrived at is what I call resonant intonation. It's a system of notation that describes the way notes function in an overtone derivation. And it's a system of drone practice that here's the key. It leaves all of your open strings and all of your harmonics of the open strings in tune in all the keys. And so that's the main thing that I want to get to. So by 11:30, seriously, Kevin, if it's 11:30 and I haven't gotten to this, just stop me and I'm going to go to that. Okay. Thanks. Okay, and then the results is I've found that for myself. When conceiving of pitch this way and when practicing pitch this way, everything has just gotten easier for me. The bass resonates better. It's easier to come up with the right version of the note right away. You don't have to be fishing around, and rehearsal isn't about like trying to figure out which version to play. You just can kind of go right to it. And then it also ties into fingering choices. I'm not going to get into that too much, but it ties in directly to an article I wrote in a couple of issues back of the ISB magazine on using third finger in low positions. So I'm not going to talk about that too much just because I don't want to kind of exclude anybody who's not interested in that. But check out that article if you're curious about it. It ties into just intonation really, really directly. It's all really the same thing in a way. Okay, so common intonation mysteries that we all know, right? This happens all the time. I see it all the time. Somebody is playing with piano. They take the A from the piano. They tune the A harmonic on the D string, and then we tune all the tuning harmonics, right? It's the way we tune the bass. And then, so you're playing along with piano, and then all of a sudden you realize that your open G is slipped flat, right? So you crank your G up higher. So I used to think that my G was slipping all the time, right? Until I finally realized that when you tune your harmonics, they're gonna be flat of the piano, and that's it's not by accident. So that's one of those weird mysteries. Another mystery that people always kind of end up facing is that you tune your harmonics and then you check with a tuner and suddenly the tuner is wrong, right? Or vice versa, you tune with a tuner, then you check your harmonics and the harmonics are wrong, and it's like wait, the tuner is digital, that can't be wrong. And the harmonics are a fact of nature, that can't be wrong, right? So that's one of those weird mysteries that is easily solved by looking at pitch this way. Here's something that happens when I'm working with students. This happens to me all the time. I'll say to a student, "Hey, we should look at intonation. Like we need to talk about your intonation." And they say, "Oh no, I practice with drones. I'm good. Don't worry." If I'm saying that there's a problem with the intonation, and you're saying you practice with a drone, then there must be a problem with the way we practice with drones, right? The usual way we use drones with a single pitch, they're highly subjective to what I'm calling conditioned intonation, which is to say, if one person, let's say there's one person who has perfect pitch and they're tuning exactly equal tempered intervals, another person is really tuning overtones and they're hearing just intervals, and another person is conditioned to like romantic expressive intonation and they have a really, really high major third, for example. Those three people, compared to one drone, those three people will come up with three different versions of the note, and all three of them are justifiably right in saying that they're in tune, right? So a single pitch drone, right off the bat, has too much wiggle room. I'll skip the rest of that. Then there are a lot of two-pitch drone systems out there. There's like cello drones, right, where you get a perfect fifth in the drone. That's good, but and it's a subtle point, but it's important. The pitch center of that drone is usually taken from equal temperament, which means that if you are droning, let's say, a perfect fifth, E flat, B flat, your G and D strings are out of tune because the pitch center is taken from equal temperament. So what I'm calling the resonant intonation drone system remedying that. Now, equal temperament, to be clear, this is not a diss on equal temperament. Equal temperament is a very necessary and beautiful and useful thing. But problems arise when we assume that it's the standard thing, right? So when we're playing an orchestra or when we're playing with all string instruments or all wind instruments, equal temperament doesn't exist in the overtone series. It doesn't exist in nature. So we're trying to squeeze the natural overtones into a system that was designed for instruments with fixed pitches, right? So basically nothing is in tune if we practice playing with a piano. Nothing is acoustically purely in tune. Here's a little tiny bit of the universal stuff I'm talking about. You always hear teachers say that the most important things are your sound, your rhythm, and your intonation, right? Well, without getting into the math and the graphics and everything, just think of it this way. Rhythm and intonation are different subsets of a much bigger spectrum of the same thing. They're actually literally the same thing. Now the quickest little kind of illustration of that I can come up with, and I just kind of happened upon this a couple days ago. I think it's cool. So here's the metronome function in the Tonal Energy app. We all know that integer numbers, right? Just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, positive integers. Those are things that exist, whether we observe them or not, whether we manipulate them or not, right? They're the integer numbers. So here's the thing. We can take a beat and divide it equally into into equal subdivisions, right? There's nothing like earth-shattering about this. This is just what we all know about rhythm. So that's a quarter note. The second integer subdivision, eighth note. The third integer subdivision, fourth, fifth, sixth, seven, eight, and 9. Right? Nothing earth-shattering there, just dividing one length of time into integer subdivisions, right? No big deal. Now, check this out. If I take this rhythm, so we're still hearing individual clicks, and if I go all the way up to 1,000 beats per minute, back to clicks, right? Does that make sense? So rhythm and intonation are literally the same thing. They're just different subsets of the same spectrum. And then sound, what we refer to as tone and sound, is the composite of the entire spectrum. It's just the degree and strength, relative strength of all the overtones present in any given sound. So, all that is to say that rather than thinking of the idea that sound, rhythm, and intonation are the most important things, reframe that and think at the bottom, sound, rhythm, intonation is the most important thing. It's all the same thing. So all the principles that apply to rhythm, because it's the same thing as intonation, all those same principles also apply to intonation. So, check this out. If I go back to here, now I'm going to go back to the one subdivision, to the basic unit of subdivision, right? Just the one. And what if I start that process of adding multiple divisions, integer divisions, but way up at the top of the spectrum? So here's quarter note equals 1,000 beats per minute, right? And I'm going to go through the integer subdivisions. 2, 3, 4, 5. Want to sing along? 6, 7, 8, 9. Back down. 8, 7, 6, 5, 4. Now, I love this. 3 and 2. And here's like the Mark Dresser undertone. So they're literally the same thing, and all the same concepts apply. So the question that's always asked is, what is just intonation? This is the second thing in your worksheets. If you kind of flip to the second page. So what is good rhythm? What makes two people? How do two people know if they're in rhythm together, right? It's like, let's say one person is clapping along in triplets and another person is clapping along in eighth notes. How do you know if they're together? Because they line up, the beats that line up, right? So the first of the eighth note, and the first eighth note and the first triplet should line up, and then they're not together in the middle, and then they line up again. So that's like in the pocket rhythm. That's like good rhythm when two people can line up the big beats regardless of what's going on in the little beats, right? Just as a generalization. So good rhythmic intonation, you could call it rhythmic intonation as well. Good sort of in the pocket intonation is when the equivalent of that would be that when the overtones of two notes line up. This could take a lot of time to go through, so I'm just going to really blow through this. You can experiment with it later. But every note you play is a major triad, right? Everybody knows the first unique pitches of the overtones series are the root, the fifth, and then the major third, right? So the strongest overtones of any note you play are the major triad. Now, all the consonant intervals, fifths, fourths, major thirds, and minor thirds, and their inversions can be tuned by matching the overtone of one to another. And this is something I do in lessons and things all the time. It takes a lot of time, so I won't do it here. But like, I could play one note, somebody else could play a different note, just a random different note. And if I'm playing, let's say for example, an A flat, and we want to tune a major third, and somebody else is playing a C, what's the shared overtone between A flat and C? What's the lowest shared overtone? C, right. So I would have a volunteer. This is why I'm not going to do it here because it takes forever. I would be playing the A flat, and I'd have a volunteer touch the C natural node on the A flat that I'm playing, right? And then somebody else playing the C, somebody else would play the fourth partial node, which would match that fifth partial of my A flat. Make sense? So when those two C's line up perfectly, that's how you know the interval is in tune. It sounds really cool, like it's a great demonstration. I wish we had time for that, but it's there's just not time to go into all that. Does that all kind of generally make sense? So rhythm and intonation, it's really the same thing. It's all about lining up the things that are supposed to line up. Here's what I mean by the sort of wrong way to think about notes and intonation. We're conditioned, not because it's anybody's fault, we're just sort of conditioned to consider equal temperament as like objectively in tune, right? I mean, like this was my conception of it all through for most of my life, basically, right? And it makes sense. You can't really blame us for thinking this because the notes on the piano, they're there. Like that's the kind of standard model. When we tune to a tuner, it gives us equal tempered notes, right? Somebody with perfect pitch. I put perfect pitch in quotes because it's a very complicated thing. Somebody with perfect pitch will sing back more or less the equal tempered version of a note, right? Electric instruments, blah, 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 the circle of fifths. We can't really blame ourselves for thinking that equal temperament is like the universal truth, the universal fact of intonation. We define intonation in terms of its deviation from 12-tone equal temperament. In other words, sense. Does that make sense? So we say that like a Baroque temperament, the sharps are low, the flats are high. We say that in just intonation, major thirds are 14 cents too low, right? We define it in terms of equal temperament because a cent is a half step, an equal tempered half step divided by 100, right? So then in the other direction, we define Pythagorean intonation, expressive intonation, etc., as sharps are high, leading tones are raised, that kind of a thing, right? So we define everything in terms of 12-tone equal temperament, which is just totally wrong. It's confusing, and that's the reason that the pitch and everything is so misleading and so confusing, is that there's nothing objective or natural about just intonation. It's a very beautiful system, and it's a very necessary system, but it's not the kind of truth of intonation. Yes, equal temperament, thank you. When I meant to say equal temperament, there's nothing natural about that. It's a contrivance. Okay. And I put perfect pitch in quotes because what perfect pitch really is enormously highly developed pitch memory. There's nothing universal about pitch, about A440. There's no kind of universal constant of equal temperament, right? It's just sort of highly developed pitch memory. Here is what I would consider the truth of intonation, the universal truth of intonation. So just intonation is in the middle. And what I mean by that is that it exists irrespective of human observation, of human manipulation. It's just a thing that is there. It's just integer subdivisions, just like the beat, the metronome thing we just did. Expanding outward from there starts to get into the territory of human interaction with the universe, right? In other words, the moment you want two strings, the moment you tune two strings together, you now have conflicting overtones. So the moment you create two strings, all bets are off, and now it's a totally different ballgame. And that kind of expands outward until gradually you get to equal temperament, where flats and sharps are equal. That line is kind of representing that in just intonation, flats are higher than sharps, and successively outward in each of these kind of like historical trends. it's kind of, very broadly, I think temperament is the history of sharps and flats becoming equal, basically. And then when you go to on the other side, which is what I call inharmonic intonation, Pythagorean and expressive, that's when sharps actually get higher than flats, right? Like raised leading tones and really wide major thirds and really low extra minor thirds, things like that. Think of those, it's inharmonic. It has nothing to do with intonation. They're expressive devices, but it's not intonation. This is the first thing in that handout. So this is what I would consider the real sort of spectrum of intonation. This is how intonation actually has worked over time. Over here, on the far left, just intonation it's perfect, but it's totally impractical. Like the moment two people are playing, it's just, the moment you modulate, whatever, it's just not really how reality works. It's sort of like a utopian thing, right? Way over on the right, think of equal temperament as the other extreme. It's not the middle. It's not the truth. It's not the starting point. Equal temperament is the other extreme from just intonation. Now, there's this vast area in the middle that represents essentially the entire history of temperament up to equal temperament. Make sense? I'm just going to kind of go through this. I know it's getting close to 11:30, but I need to move on. So what I'm calling resonant intonation is that vast middle territory that, because we're not constrained to fixed pitches, we don't have to choose one or the other. We have this whole middle territory to play with. And so over here in just intonation, flats are higher than sharps, and way over here in equal temperament, sharps are equal to flats. And there's a lot of wiggle room between there. So we don't have to spend all of our playing right there, and we'll never spend all of our playing over here because it's impossible. But there's a lot of territory in the middle. I got really frustrated with the fact that there are there's no way to graphically represent what happens in intonation, right? So I'm going to just blow through this, bear with me. Circle of fifths, it represents 12-tone equal temperament. The circle connects, and harmonics are equal. Got it? Moving on. This is what really happens when you stack perfect fifths. So if you start with a low C and you tune exactly perfect fifths all the way around, you end up with a B sharp that's higher than the C was if you just took octaves from the C. That's the Pythagorean comma. So essentially what equal temperament does is it just takes that distance, distributes it equally among all these, and the circle connects, right? But what I'm going to point out is that, what I'm going to show is that Pythagorean intonation has nothing to do with tonal intonation. You cannot derive a just major scale from the Pythagorean set. There's only a little bit of overlap. The opposite is true in the opposite direction, just blah, blah, blah. So if you take both directions, then you end up with this spiral. And mathematically, none of these notes ever yields a perfect octave with another note. And that's what I mean when I say that, like, it gets into human interaction with the universe. The moment you tune two strings and try to make them match, the overtones are just not going to. Everything can only be in tune if you have only one vibrating body. And then the moment you modulate, which is essentially adding another vibrating body at an existing resonance with the first one, then you end up with non-matching overtones. So I thought, okay, why bother with the circle if it doesn't connect? So this is a start for like what I'm going to develop into like the resonant intonation array. So that blue line represents equal temperament, and this is what happens if you start at A, you tune to A, and everybody tunes perfect fifths all the way up and down. That's what actually happens. This represents, by the way, why when you start playing when you tune your A, when you take the A from the piano and you tune your harmonics, and then you find 30 seconds later that your low G has slipped too low. This is why. If you tune perfect fifths, perfect fourths, your G is below the equal tempered line. And that's why the low C on the cello is often so grumbly and kind of hard to tune to. And that's why the E on the violin is so bright and disgusting. Okay. Another problem with the circle of fifths. Check this out. What this means is that the keys radiate outward symmetrically from C, right? You go from C major, empty set, 0 sharp, 0 flats, 1 sharp, 1 flat, right? Makes sense? C is the middle in terms of keys. But that doesn't help us in terms of notes. It's always weirded me out that all the sharps and flats are weighted over to this side, and that with C as the middle, you go 2 notes to the left before you get a sharp flat, and you have to go way around clockwise before you get a sharp flat. So D is actually the middle in terms of notes, and there's more to that. Check this out. D is the middle letter of the musical alphabet, A through G. The keys on the keyboard are arranged mirror image symmetrically around D. You go right or left 1 note and you get a sharp flat. You go right or left 2 notes, you get a natural, et cetera, et cetera. So C is not the middle of notes. D is the middle in terms of notes.
11:30, Scott. Just an FYI.
Thank you. I'm okay. This is gonna just 11:35. How much 11:35? Now, if you consider the open strings of the modern orchestra, right, tuned in fifths, string quartet has equal numbers of instruments that tune up to E and equal instruments that equal down to C, that tune down to C, right? 2 violins, violoncello. So on average, the middle string of the string quartet of the violin family is D. On average, the middle string of all of the bass tunings is D, right? Standard 4-string is sort of balanced out by 5th tuning, which goes all down here. Extension tuned to C, then D is right in the middle. 5-string with C, D is right in the middle. These 3 historical tunings, D is literally exactly in the middle, whether it's 4ths or 5ths, or the D major triad of the in these tuning. So I thought, okay, if I'm going to make a visual representation of what the notes do, D is going to be the center, right? So that would be a sort of updated, not circle of fifths, but sort of spiral of fifths. I wanted to look at what does a major scale look like. So here is the shape of a major scale, right? D, E, F sharp, then you skip way across a half step, and then more whole steps, and then skip across a half step. That's the shape of a major scale. But that doesn't account for harmonic overtone derivation. This does. These red arrows are 3rd partial overtones of the starting pitch, and these blue arrows are 5th partial overtones of the starting pitch. Makes sense, your F sharp harmonic, your B harmonic. So what I did is I thought, okay, I'm going to give the 5th partial letters a capital letter. The 5th partial relationships, I'm going to give the 3rd partial relationships capital letters, and the 5th partial relationships lowercase letters. It's confusing because the 3rd partial is the 5th of the chord, and the 5th partial is the 3rd of the chord, so I mixed that up. So does that make sense? So this would be kind of a just major scale. D, capital E, lowercase F sharp, because that's your F sharp harmonic, capital G, because that's your open G, A, that's your open A, B, taken as an overtone from the G string, so that's a lowercase, C sharp taken as an overtone from the A string, so that's lowercase, and back to D. Does that kind of make sense? So capital letters to represent Pythagorean motion, lowercase letters to represent 5th partial harmonic overtone derivation from a capital letter. Okay, so that would basically be an array of a just D major scale. I'm going to keep on going. There is such a thing as what I'm calling a sub-major scale, which is what if you take that exact same shape and keep the intervallic structure but flip it around. So you start with D and you go down a major whole step to C, et cetera, right? That kind of makes sense. You end up with the notes of a B flat major scale, but intervallically everything is still resonant with the original open D. I would love to be demonstrating this stuff, but there's just not time. Sorry to not be playing it all yet. So this would be the representation of a just D sub major scale. These flats go up above the equal temperament line, while the fifths go down below the equal temperament line. Does that make sense? Okay. This was a reminder for myself to create a slide. Basically what I'm trying to show here is that there is kind of precedent for this kind of notation, that like this used to be, this was like whatever, like, medieval typesetting for the letter B. And when they wanted the flat version, they made it a lowercase b. That became the flat sign. And then this all kind of morphed into natural and flat. But it all came from the typesettings of capital and lowercase b, because that's where the sharp, flat, and natural signs come from. It persists. I mean, the German words for major and minor are basically translate to soft and hard, which refers to the hard edges, dur, like durable, of a capital B, or mal, the soft, malleable edges of a lowercase b. Same in French. I'm not going to try to pronounce it, but sharp means square, sort of, referring to the square letters of the capital B. And flat means bemol, the soft b, lowercase b. So there is precedent for using this. They could have done it that way for all the letters, like lowercase e could have been E flat, but fortunately for me, they kept the b and applied that to everything. Here's that. You have this in your handout. This is what I call the array of all the notes that are derived from the starting pitch D in pure harmonic overtone and undertone derivation. These are recognized as the major third harmonics on all of your strings, right? These are the undertone, the major third undertone, if you consider that the major third. Does that make sense? And then the italic letters are an overtone or undertone of a lowercase letter. I wish I had more time to really explain this. Nick, would you help me? Sure. So if I'm starting with a starting point D, everybody can see how the G and A are derived from that. We all tune out tuning harmonics. That's third partial relationships, right? Then everybody knows F sharp, B, C sharp harmonics. Those are acoustically in tune, even though they're out of tune on the piano, right? The piano is wrong, your bass is right. So a pure D major scale is those overtones arranged serially, right? So that's a pure D major scale. Everything is derived from the starting point D. The subscale, and here's where I need help. If I'm going to play, let's say I'm going to take this G as a constant. I've put everything, all the bold letters are what I'm calling constants. They're the three shared strings, and the three shared strings of all the string instruments in the orchestra, and their over and undertones. So everything in bold is a constant. You kind of want to keep them as much the same as possible. So if I'm going to take G as a constant, what overtone is shared between the note E flat and G? G. Yeah, that's the lowest shared overtone. So if I play an E flat, I want the G harmonic on the E flat to match the G harmonic on the G. So that's a pure E flat in the key of G. Thank you. And that's how all the notes above and to the left go. Those are all, so left and above are undertones, right and below are overtones. Now italics are, let's say I take this F sharp and define that as a new starting point. Now a major third above that is going to be a major third of a major third. So give me an A sharp. Give me an A sharp off of F sharp. Make sense? So matching F sharp and A sharp overtones. Thank you. So because this F sharp is a lowercase letter, and this A sharp is a fifth partial relationship to a lowercase letter, it's now an italic letter, which is very low. So that's A sharp pure to the opening D, which, as you know, is not bad. Exactly. And B flat. I'll listen to the poor man's version. So that's a B flat that's in tune to the G string. If you play B flat, so it's not the same as that either. Kind of makes sense. So sharps and flats are not the same thing. There is no enharmonic equivalency in real intonation. Okay, I need to get on with what I was even with the whole point. So this is what I call this is that array, the primary array, all the notes derived from D, but sort of scrunched together. This is what happens when you tune your open strings to equal temperament, but you keep the fifth partial relationships pure. And this is the way I think that, like, this is to me the definition of like generally good ensemble playing. This is the way that most people who just sort of have a good ear play, in my observation. Because the open strings have to be equal tempered, just because you can't get too far around before you just start getting into all kinds of weird things in ensemble playing. But if you keep the fifth partial relationships pure, then you can be generating more or less most notes in tune. So you have to have these 21 notes. There aren't 12 notes in an octave. There have to be at least 21 notes in an octave, basically. And some of them have different versions. E has two versions, B has two versions, C has two versions, etc. I'd like to get more into that, but I'm just going to kind of jump right into. I'm just going to kind of keep going. This is the way I think of the array in equal temperament. Like if you're playing with piano, this is how I think of it. See how the notes in the middle, they're capital letters, and they kind of expand smaller and smaller outward. So the actual frequency of the notes, the actual physical location on the instrument is the same as equal temperament, but I'm still thinking them in terms of their harmonic overtone and undertone derivation from D. And that's where it ties into my like 1-3-4, 1-2-4 fingering system, because it's like if I'm going to play, if I'm going to play a C sharp, for example, if I'm going to play a G sharp, that's going to be a second finger because I know that it's a major third harmonic over the fourth finger, right? It's an overtone finger. But if I'm going to play A flat, that is an undertone of C. So for me, that's the third finger, right? So they're not in the same place because they're not the same, no. And in equal temperament, they'll be literally the same place, which is fine because when you're not playing with piano, the tendencies of your hand will naturally get them toward the tendencies of just intonation. So I'm not going to get too much into my fingering system. Check out the article I wrote a few months back in ISB, but it ties into this in that way, partly in that way. There's more to it than that. I'm going to go back to the tonal energy app. Now we're going to get out of the metronome function and go to the pitch generation function. So this app is really, it's so late, crap, okay. This app is really, really well designed, check this out. All of these relationships are exactly what they've programmed into the keyboard, into the visual layout of the keyboard. The letter names are wrong, and I've emailed them about that. They're going to change that. Like, for example, the D flat is actually a C sharp, and they've said they're planning to change that. They've been planning to change that anyway. But check this out. If you look on that note array, G to D should be a perfect fifth, right? D to A should be a perfect fifth. But E to B is that wolf fifth because it's a capital E and a lowercase b, which sounds like this. Right? So they totally got it right. E flat and B flat is a perfect fifth, but E flat and G sharp are not, right? It says A flat, it's really a G sharp, and they're going to fix that in the app. Okay, makes sense? So this is in the handout. It's basically just these are the notes that tonal energy yields in each of these keys, because the notes on the piano keyboard are just not right. So I kind of snuck this in there just so you kind of have a reference for that. Okay. Here's where we get to like how you use it, how I use it, what I do with it. If you're going to play scales with drones, how many? Okay, so we talked about why single pitch drones are not as effective as multiple pitch drones, and the perfect fifth is the most resonant interval. So it's the first unique overtone, so it's the most resonant interval. How many perfect fifths are there in a scale, in a major scale? 6, right? So in this array form, each of these pairs of notes is a perfect fifth, except that, which is the Wolf fifth. And in a scalar form, D to A is a perfect fifth, E to B is a perfect fifth. So there are 6 pairs of perfect fifths in a major scale. Not pure fifths, but what we call perfect fifths. Now, if you can play one major scale to 6 perfect fifth drone settings, wait, hang on, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. So I'll play a D major scale to each of those pairs of perfect fifths. So the first one would be G to D. So that's the 4th and the 5th of the chord of the key. And if I just play a D major scale to that, it kind of clarifies certain notes that makes other ones harder. What's interesting about that one is that it prefers lowercase e because it gives you a B natural over the G, and it likes that lower version of E, which is lowercase e, which does not work with capital A. Right? Make sense? So rather than just be like, rather than all the confusion of what is what, one is lowercase e and one is capital E, capital A. It makes sense. Okay. The next one is going to be, the next perfect fifth in the succession is D to A. This is the one everybody uses most of the time. This is capital E. The next one up the succession would be EB, but that's in a just D major. That's the Wolf fifth. So you can adjust the E to make it pure, but I'm just not going to deal with that right now. The next one up the succession is going to be.
Because I'm using capital E and lowercase b.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, then I'm going to do B to F sharp. This one prefers lowercase e because it gives you that E. So it wants lowercase e. So that makes the E an impure, a Wolf fifth with your A, hence temperaments. This is where it gets confusing, right? Okay, what I find the most useful drone pair is the scale degree 3 and scale degree 7, because those are the most different from what we're used to on the piano, right? So if I play
7, yeah.
Sorry?
3 and 7.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly, yeah. So basically with those intervals droning. So if I play D major scale with those drones, it really clarifies the 3rd and 7th scale degrees. I find it really interesting to play around with those because some of them it really clarifies where that note needs to be. Okay, then if you can play a major scale to 6 different pairs of perfect fifths, then you can take one pair of perfect, you can take one perfect fifth and play 6 different major scales to it, right? In other words, down at the bottom, let's take G and D for example. If I drone the G and D taken from the resonances of the bass, those 6 down at the bottom. Those are the keys that have G and D in them. So so check this out. G and D. I'll play those 6 keys. G, obviously. D, I've already done. G, obviously. Right? No big surprise. What's next? Let's take C major. This is a Wolf fifth key in this, so it's not as hard of a tune, which is why C major is hard too. So, for example, if I take that C, there's a G overtone on it. So, there's capital C, right? Okay, then what's next? F, thank you. So there's B flat. That's the first flat. Actually, the D overtone is
Okay, so yeah.
yeah. So that D overtone should match the D that you're hearing there. So if you see how wide that is, there's B natural. So that is the spacing of a pure whole-step chromatic half-step, diatonic half-step chromatic half-step. Right? Where were we? Then D flat, maybe. So we have a low in C flat. The G overtone of that should match the G overtone of that. It should be this note. Yeah. It's just hard when they're both going to note. So that's E flat, pure to this. So D harmonic and G harmonic are in the key of E flat, which is helpful. Okay. So given the resonances of just these 2 strings, you can derive all the way around to 3 to keys of 3 flats. Now it gets super interesting when you start going kind of modulating around the rhythm. So if I go from like skipping around the keys, you start to hear those differently sized half steps. Okay, which brings me to this. This is like the gist of the whole thing. This is what you can like take home and use and just practice with. So over here, this is the, if your tonal energy app is set to D just, then these perfect fifth drone settings will yield these notes and these keys.
Yes.
That,
12 notes.
yeah, 12. Yeah, exactly. 12 notes. The notes on either end are always half step and tritone relationship, so they're the least resonant. That's going to be a major key, major key, major key, major minor, major minor, major minor, and that's what this is down here. So, these are the versions of the notes that are resonant with all the shared over and undertones of the string section, and by extension, all the non-fixed pitch instruments that tune to A. So, horn section is tuned this way, wind section is tuned this way. Anything that is not a fixed pitch instrument has the same overtone series, so they're all going to tune this way. There is such a thing as inharmonic overtones, but that's a whole different story, so we'll get that. We're just not going to get to that. But, so I'd love to kind of, Kevin, what time is it?
11:57.
Thank you. Ooh, 57 really?
Really?
Oh, crap. Okay. So I'll just demonstrate a tiny bit of how I would use this. So if somebody just wants to name a piece, any piece that you wouldn't play with piano. If you're going to play with piano, then use MIDI files. Do it. Don't guess about where the pitch is going to be. Just go to the piano. But name some piece that you're going to play that doesn't have piano. That you're not going to play with piano. What would be something you want to practice? Bach. Okay. So let's take. Okay, which suite?
First suite.
Say one I know. Good. Thanks. So. I'm going to say, G major. So I'm going to go and find all the spots on here that have a G in them. So these are the 3 drone settings that yield a G major that is resonant with all the overtones and undertones of the bass. So let's just try them all. I'll take this B F sharp because that's the one that most clarifies the 3rd and 7th scale degree, right? So, my bass minor slopes, but that should be the same as this. So, first I would just be playing scales in G major scales against that. The versions of those notes just to the instrument. So it's in C minor, right? So I'd look down here and I'd say, okay, minor keys are any of the 3 ones to the right on the right side of the underline can be minor keys, right? So that is really the only drone setting that's going to give me C minor. So I'm going to first practice C minor to that. down to E flat minor. You expect when that modulates that it's going to go to the relative major, right? But it goes to the tonic of the relative major, but turns it into a minor because he's very relevant. So, what drone setting would I use for E flat minor then? Either of these, right? So I'm going to practice E flat minor scale. Does that make sense? So I'm going to practice E flat minor scale to that drone setting because that works down here. You can see it works as a minor key. Minor. So I'm going to set this to. I'm going to play E flat minor to that. So G flat shares what overtone with those? B flat. So that's the B flat overtone on G flat. So that's a pure G flat to the bass, and F sharp is. It's probably that piano's probably really high because that's pretty close. So. D flat, C flat. C flat's cool. What resonance does the C flat share with those E flat? So this right there. Cool. So here's E flat. Here's C flat resonant to the bass. See how high that is? That's not B, right? B is there. So, I would be practicing those scales with those drones, and I would do this. Just nice and slow. Makes sense? So most of those notes share a resonance with that. Okay, so far so good. Sorry, now here's where we go. Now we go into E flat minor, so I need to switch. D is in tune, right? So that's a diminished form, not a major third. Right? That's why that's always so hard to tune, is because people try to tune it like a major third, and so your D string ends up being a major. C flat. See how high C flat is? Yeah. So that's B flat, C flat. So I know that seems tedious to just kind of explain, but you get the hang of it and you just start to hear those notes. All those notes are the same in all the drone settings. There's only one version of G flat. There's only one version of F sharp. So it's not like you're learning all these variable things. They're all actually, it's 21 different notes, but they're all the exact same 21 notes. Okay, so I would say that in the orchestra in Cleveland, what I've observed is that when we in a first rehearsal of something, it's often more or less equal temperate. Like people are just kind of like playing the notes as in the kind of average version. But what I find is that by the end of a cycle, especially by the end of the tour, when we've played the same piece over and over and over, there's greater differentiation of the sharps and flats. Like lowercase e starts to really become defined as different from capital E, and B flat becomes higher than A sharp, and it really does actually work that way. It's not just kind of just for just intonation practice. That's really how sound works. We just did a Smetana piece that has a lot of C flats, and by the Sunday concert when we were really kind of figuring it out, the C flats were really high. Everybody was just kind of tuning that way. So you don't have to know any of this to tune that way. That's just sort of the way sound works. And knowing this doesn't mean you play well in tune, right?
That's the way people play.
Yeah, that's the way people, exactly. So I think that I guess I should wrap it up there. Thank you so much. I hope this is useful. I put my email address because I'd love for people to contact me with if it's useful, what isn't clear, what is clear.
Can you go over tuning the bass real quick?
Oh yeah, sure. So that very last page, I just put it in there because I see a lot of things happen where it's like all the time I see somebody when you're playing with piano, you take the A from the piano and then you tune your tuning harmonics, right? That's gonna make 3 of your strings out of tune with the piano. So just don't do that. So take your open strings from the piano, a piano that is in tune, and tune your open strings to the open strings of the piano, and just deal with it. Just accept that your harmonics are going to be out of tune. So don't check the harmonics. Just trust that they're going to be out of tune. Conversely, if you're practicing by yourself and you want to have really just intervals to practice this way, don't check your open strings with a tuner because that's going to be out of tune. Like they're both right. Just you have to know the context, right? And for most, this is really key, really important to me. I think in most ensemble contexts, like 99% of ensemble playing, tune your open strings equal tempered. Just do it. When the low C of the cello is just kind of grumbly, and then it creates a Pythagorean major third, which is wider than an equal tempered major third with the open E of the violins, it's just no good. So start with equal tempered open strings, and then tune pure fifth partial relationships from those. That's what I consider kind of good resonant, kind of orchestral intonation. And I wrote in there, but I really believe you should always never tune a string down. Your bass is going to be really unstable the moment you tune a string down. So if one of your strings is sharp, then tune them all down below pitch. Pull out the tension, pull out the extra slack, and tune all 4 of them up to pitch. It'll remain much more stable that way. I promise. Cool. Yeah.
What would you tune your bass to in an audition?
Equal tempered open strings.
Yeah.
Yeah. And here's the next thing, and I kind of started to talk with Sam a little bit about this the other day, that like I'd like to create an app or patches or something that will do this, all of this, but based from equal tempered open strings, because that's really where it would be the most useful for everyday use. So, good question, great place to stop. Thanks everybody. Thank you.